You're in the water loop.
Waterloop. Hey everyone, this is Travis with Waterloop. I know a lot of people want to use water-efficient fixtures, but they're afraid they won't work as well. Let me tell you about High Sierra Showerheads, which was named Best Showerhead by Popular Science. I just installed one at my house, and I was genuinely surprised at the power and coverage of the water. High Sierra showerheads earn the EPA WaterSense label for water efficiency. They use at least 40% less water than the conventional low-flow showerheads. High Sierra showerheads are constructed out of metal, so there's no plastic involved, they're very durable, and they're naturally antibacterial. One of my favorite things, these showerheads are made in the USA by a small business located in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Get 20% off with promo code WATERLOOP at highsierrashowerheads.com.
Waterloop.
Welcome to Waterloop. This is Travis. Very excited for my first repeat guest, Chad Nelsen, CEO of Surfrider Foundation. Chad, how's it going?
Excellent. Thanks for having me back. It's an honor.
Yeah. Like I mentioned on that first episode, you know, you're like my favorite organization, really, as a surfer and as just a beach and ocean lover. How could I have any other NGO ahead of you guys in my life? So,
well, I appreciate that.
For sure. We're talking during this kind of crazy time here with coronavirus and, disruptions across our society in many different ways. One of the things has been beach access and ocean access and kind of people having to stay home. I'm just curious, how's it been for you in a lot of different ways here as the head of Surfrider, as a California resident, as a surfer?
Sure. Well, I think like everybody in the world, we were taken by surprise in, early March, mid-March, when we realized that the COVID threat was real and spreading quickly. And, it was really interesting because what we witnessed was, offices were closed down, work was closed in, restaurants, everything. And so the front end of this, people had time. And so they were actually rushed to the beach, and the beaches were overcrowded. And so at least here in California, and I think in many other places, including around the world, they actually closed the beaches. Right? It was like, okay, we gotta, the gyms were closing, everything was closing, and so it was interesting that it just showed how much people love the beach. Like, given the free time and the lack of other options, people rushed to the beach. And so, we faced nationwide beach closures, which, short of a massive sewage spill or an oil spill, is something we've never seen. And we're an organization that champions beach access and ocean recreation and people getting out there to surf, but at the same time we realize that this is a serious public health threat. So we actually came out in support of staying home, encouraged people to stay home. We had a stay home shred later sort of message we were putting out to folks. But, it was hard. People needed to get outside. There was discussion about essential activities, and, getting outside and exercise was one of those.
Yeah.
And so, that was phase one of this whole thing.
Yeah. And yeah, totally. People were like, well, I want to be outside. Sunshine's good. Fresh air's good. Exercise is good. Right. So I want to go to the beach, but then you get too many people there. That's where I guess the issues are. I think we were only, from when the time things started closing as economically, I think the beach was open for maybe a week, maybe two, not even probably here. So definitely got a couple trips in myself, and then they shut that down. And I totally understand the big picture, but it's tough, being can't go to the ocean unless you have a boat and you can go off someplace and get out there that way. But it's tough being, cut off from the ocean and looking at a long time before you can surf again,
Absolutely. We know getting outside and getting exercise is good for our mental, physical health. And for a lot of people, the coast and the ocean is their primary source of recreation. So, that was tough on people. People were walking in the streets, parks, a lot of parks were closed too, so there weren't a lot of options, and that was pretty challenging. And one of the things we learned was, part of the problem was, it's true for I think all of society. We didn't have a strategy, on how to provide access in a way that was going to balance really important health and safety concerns with recreation. And that was kind of the next phase of this. About 3 weeks ago or so, we started talking about, the curve had sort of been flattened, arguably, and so there was there was a lot of discussion about opening up areas, and we got very involved in trying to help set some principles and guidelines to reopen beaches. So
I saw you guys. Yeah, I saw you guys put that together. I follow all your stuff on social media. I saw that come out. So, talk about that. You kind of put together a group of experts. Who kind of what different areas of expertise, and what did they come up with? What were these principles and guidelines?
Yeah, so we realized, hey, we have a lot of expertise on beach going. We worked with the guys at Surfline. In Australia and Hawaii were early adopters in this idea of recreation only, sort of a keep it moving policy. And so that's a way of avoiding crowds, and provides opportunities for exercise. So we assembled a group of experts that were in public health, because that's obviously paramount, coastal law and policy, because beach access issues obviously relate to that, coastal management, some on-the-ground experts that represent cities, California and Virginia, and we were like, okay, the management agencies are struggling. We've seen what's worked. Let's make sure that we consult with scientists and experts, and so we put out a set of principles and guidelines. The principle piece of it was really important, which is, hey, these are. And this was an interesting conflict. These are public resources, beaches in the ocean, that are available to all. So we need to remember that. But that's conflicting with this idea that if anyone can come, it's overcrowded and therefore a public health threat. So we're going to limit access to places that shouldn't have access limited because of a health issue. And so we want to acknowledge that tension and say, in this case, public health is paramount. But let's not lose sight of the fact that these are places that are, to the public. And the other part of that is, I live in Laguna Beach. I'm a mile from the ocean. I can walk to the beach. That's a real privilege. And so if we have to stay local, it means I can get to the beach. But not everybody's got that opportunity. So there's a huge equity issue with beach access. There always has been, and this has made it worse. So, the inland communities from where I live aren't invited to the beach because it's stay local. So we really wanted to make sure this didn't turn into a localism issue.
Interesting. I did like that, the principles piece. You were kind of like laying out these big overarching philosophies to hey, here's the things to consider with beach access as you're trying to figure out the specific workings of how it's going to go. That was a great start.
Yeah, and then we get into the nitty gritty of hey, it came down to, I think, limiting parking. So that has a twofold impact. One is it discourages people from out of town to come into town because we weren't supposed to be traveling. And two, it just limits the overall capacity of people that can visit the beach. So it reduces crowds. This keep it moving policy, I think, was really good. Turns out really hard to enforce, I can tell you about. But, so the idea there was walking, running, swimming, paddling, surfing. These are all activities that you can do with physical distancing by yourself. And why not allow people to get out there and get that exercise as long as they're following those rules? It also, my kids who are lifeguards, I can tell you about that, were, they were hearing, but I can't keep walking the whole time. I'm going to get tired. And they're like, that's right. Then you should leave so somebody else can come. We need that turnover. You can't surf. It's hard to surf for 8 hours, but if you surf for 2, you leave the next 2 for somebody else and the next 2 for somebody else. So it actually helps more people enjoy the beach while having space.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Kind of like turnover at a restaurant or something.
Right. Yeah. You've sat at that table long enough. Time to move along. So that was one of your big guidelines was hey, let's kind of allow access, but limit it in a way with capacity, kind of.
Exactly. Keep people moving and recreating was another sort of huge pillar of that. And we needed enforcement.
Yeah, that's key. So this it sounds,
So,
so yeah, the enforcement piece. What'd you call for there?
You need to have education, signage, which you see all over, explaining the rules, encouraging people to actually read them and follow them. And then you need people down on the beach, keeping people moving, because people either didn't understand the rules or didn't want to follow the rules. And that's where my kids come in. They're both lifeguards in Laguna Beach here. And so they were down on the beaches early because they were out of school, trying to enforce this keep it moving recreation only policy, which we're still operating under today.
Yeah, I saw on Twitter when you put up something one morning about your sons who are lifeguards and just them being out. What's it like as a father for you having your sons, be out there kind of lifeguards during this time? And yeah, what's that been like?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, because we're also, the other thing that's happening, I think there's some good science that's come out in the last month about the fact that, we're learning about how this disease is passed along to different people, so surfaces were a big concern and now, and crowds still are, but we're learning that being outside is actually one of the better places to be. But, they're out on the front lines, they're wearing the N95 masks, trying to get people to follow these rules, which, was challenging because, one of the other things that's so crazy is that I guess like climate change and other things, it got so politicized, so there were people, of course, saying, these rules are ridiculous. I don't want to follow them. And you hear these, 18-year-old kids who are lifeguards having to enforce them with people who don't believe that COVID is real and that this is all a conspiracy theory. And so challenging stuff.
Yeah, it's unbelievable the how things have gone off the rails in that regard, Well, it sounds a lot similar to what's going on here in North Carolina. The beaches were just closed for a long time. And then they started allowing that you can come and recreate, no towel, no chairs, walk, surf, keep moving. But parking was extremely limited. So, that really kept people out. We still don't have parking opened up all the way, but they have let us, you can now sit and kind of do your regular beach activities. So
spread out.
Yeah, exactly. No big groups. But I was out there, doing a walk with the family, and I had the beach patrol coming along, and if people were sitting down, they were having to tell them, get up and move along and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, well, hopefully, I know there's been confusion there in California too. Like they opened up some beaches and they got mobbed with people, and then so they had to backtrack on that, and it's just been a real tough process.
It has been. I think. It's in some ways a metaphor for this whole thing, right? You need a strategy, and everyone's doing this for the first time because it's all unprecedented, and the science is evolving and we're learning. And then you need public compliance to that strategy, and this is true for restaurants and true for all these things. And but yeah, and it's hard because when things are changing dynamically, getting that information out to the public in a way that makes sense is really challenging. And I get it. There's a patchwork of rules that are changing all the time. Like, it's even if you're someone like you or me who's super tuned into what's happening at the beach, in my hometown, people are like, are they open? Are they closed? What can I do? What can I not do? And so if you're not a avid beachgoer, it would be even more challenging.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I know, before we move to a different topic, I know that like when I finally could get back to the beach and I got like my first surf session in probably close to 2 months.
Yeah.
Oh man, it was amazing. I was just like grinning. It was awesome. It was like life came back. So
yeah, the absence makes the heart grow fonder.
Yeah, totally.
I think there's a lot of people who really, are like, wow, I didn't realize how much I was going to miss this and how much I actually appreciate it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a couple other topics. I wanted to
Yes.
ask about, you guys put out a report recently, and there's some interesting pieces
Sure.
in there. I wanted to find out a little more about your Blue Water Task Force and
Sure.
how you view the role of citizen science. Different organizations try to utilize citizen science, and I'm just kind of curious how you guys use it, why you feel it's important.
Well, I think it's important on so many levels. So the Blue Water Task Force is our volunteer recreational water quality monitoring program, and we have these labs all across the country doing testing, and they kind of vary a little bit depending on their location. Some are weekly, some are seasonal, but the goal is to sample recreational water for fecal indicator bacteria, human waste, kind of the pathogens that are most likely to get us sick and are an indicator for urban runoff and other things. And so we're trying to see if it's healthy to safe to surf, swim, or play in the ocean. And that program serves in a lot of functions. In some cases, we test places that aren't tested by the agencies, either by location or time. A lot of the official county health department testing is done seasonally, but surfers are surfing all year round. So we want to make sure we're keeping track. And in a lot of cases, the wet season, is dirtier because of rainfall than the dry season. So it's even more important, particularly on the West Coast where we tend to have dry summers. You guys can have wet summers, but so part of it is trying to know if it's safe for surf to swim. So it's just a good old-fashioned monitoring program. Oftentimes we find problems where we see chronically high levels of bacterial pollution, and so then we want to zoom in and try to solve those problems. So it can become like source detection or a means of raising awareness about an issue that we can get other the responsible agencies to tackle.
So is that what you do with the data then? Is you're looking for problems, or do you also release it as you get the results? Is it published anywhere? How does that work?
Yeah, so it's great actually. It's real-time data on a website that we publish. So the way it works is we collect a sample. We use sort of an IDEX process. It's a standard EPA approved methodology. It uses Enterococcus, which is like a fecal indicator bacteria. We have to incubate it in an incubator for 18 hours or 24 hours, and we get the results the next day. And then we post those on our website. So you can zoom in, if you go to our website, you can go to Blue Water Task Force. You can zoom into your location, see the dots on the map where we're testing, click on those dots and see the most recent and historical data for all the locations. So it's up real time, and so we're using that to educate people real time. We're using that to see if we find trends and see if there's problems. We do a lot of it through high school programs too. So there's a huge educational program.
That's awesome.
And it's great. So they do it through the high schools, sometimes like the biology or chemistry program. And, there's a lot of great learnings going on because, as soon as you start sampling the water, you learn a lot about microbiology, you learn about chemistry, and you start asking questions. Hey, why is that place clean? Why is it dirty? And so there's a lot of good education, and ultimately, it gives people agency. They're in it, they know it, they understand it, they become experts, and that puts them in a great position to be an advocate for clean water.
Yeah, very, very cool. Another program that kind of jumped out when I was looking through your report, and I've heard about this one before, but haven't talked to you about it, and that's the Ocean Friendly Gardens program. Kind of getting people really to build rain gardens or businesses, whatever, to build rain gardens on their property. Talk about that and why that's a program that Surfrider started.
Yeah, it's a great question. So solving a sort of watershed scale water pollution problem. Sometimes we can identify a specific hotspot that's causing the problem, a leaky pipe in a public bathroom, which is something we found once, or something like that. But oftentimes this is sort of a collective watershed-wide sort of death by a thousand cuts problem. And we can solve those through an incredibly complex permitting process through the EPA,
Yeah.
And those are really sort of arcane, challenging, really important, but permitting processes that go for your regional water quality control boards or whoever it is, and so we do that, but from an activist standpoint, it's pretty dull and pretty frustrating and pretty complex. It's hard for to get up in the morning and say, hey, I want to make a difference on water quality, and slug through 300-page reports with technical data, and then go to hearings for a process that in 5 years will ultimately clean up the water.
I worked at EPA for 6 or 7 years, so I understand fully.
EES permits, and so we do that work. It's really important. I'm not trying to downplay it.
Sure.
No standard certainly helping, but so we're like, all right, that's great, but we have a bunch of activists that are doers. They want to go out there and make a difference. Well, a lot of people have control over some dirt on the planet, whether it's your front yard or your apartment's HOA or your business's landscaping. And so let's start there and tackle that. And I mean, what's amazing is a lot of times those are actually sources of pollution because whatever's being planted there requires herbicides and pesticides, or it's a source of water runoff because it's being overwatered, or it's a source of water waste because what's planted there is not appropriate to the climate. So we're like, let's start a program where we can actually, we call it CPR, conservation, permeability, and retention. And so planting of climate appropriate plants or native plants conserves water. Permeability is about trying to bust up that pavement and make sure you have healthy soil so the soil can act like a sponge and suck it in. And retention is about little berms so we can capture some of that water so it can soak in. And there's green infrastructure and other things. This is sort of like the landscape. So we're like, hey, turn your garden into a solution for pollution, and you can reduce the amount of pesticides and herbicides you need, the amount of water, and it turned out there was a boom in gardening right at the beginning of COVID. Because you're stuck at home, and so all of a sudden people were like, oh, well, I'm gonna start planting a garden, or they were worried about food security because you can do it for your landscaping, or you could do it for food garden. Yeah. Same principle apply, and so it's actually been a pretty successful program. People, are excited about it. We have a guides books. You can either hire a landscaper and have them follow the principles, or you can do it yourself.
Do it, yeah. And I think I saw a bunch of these got built in Florida in one area, maybe, I think. And Sebastian Inlet area, maybe, that Central Florida spot there. And of course, sure. Florida has been just crushed the past bunch of years with these algae blooms, all the nutrients from ag in Florida, which people don't really think about a lot. And then just they got the warm water temps. And so they've just been having a tough time with nutrient pollution.
Massive problem with nutrient pollution. And it's causing horrific, red tides, but these different types of harmful algal blooms that are killing fish, and some of them are toxic, and it's a mess. And again, so fertilizer is another example, right? You fertilize your grass or your plants, and if you build an ocean-friendly garden, you don't need fertilizers because you have healthy soils and you're using climate-adapted plants, and so it reduces that need of adding all those nutrients to the system. We're not doing it at a scale that's going to solve the problem in southern Florida, but we are showing what's possible. So I'm sure you've probably talked about this, but you can do municipal scale green infrastructure and start building bioswales and parking lots that absorb water, and those are really taking the Ocean Friendly Gardens principles to scale. And that solves one big piece of the eutrophication problem. In Florida, they have the Everglades and some really huge, complex water and nutrient management issues that are bigger than Surfrider. But we're just trying to do our part to help people understand, what these systems are, and if they get interested, then we'll be like, well, hey, there's state legislation to address these issues also. So these are all like our gateways into the issue.
Yeah. Every bit helps, right? Like we have to do all. It's not just the big, huge Army Corps of Engineers Everglades projects, but it's like people can do things on their property, and then 100 people do that, 1,000 people do it. It all adds up, of course.
Non-point, right? It's not one source, it's a million sources. So let's start chipping those little ones away.
Exactly. Totally different topic. One that's always fascinated me is like the crazy people that surf in the Great Lakes. Mostly because it seems like a lot of their waves are in the winter when the water's so cold, and you see those like iconic photos of the guys with like the beards and the icicles and stuff. I guess surfing creates that passion, but what's up with those guys? And I saw them in their report. People up there get some credit for some good activism and everything up that way too.
Yeah, we have a great story which I can tell you about U.S. Steel. There are these like hardy surfers that are, we have 5 chapters in the Great Lakes. These are water lovers, because you don't have to be a surfer to be a Surfrider member, but some of them are. I should know this, but I think, the polar vortex storms, for example, that come down out of Canada, I'm pretty sure those are the storms that generate enough wind to create the waves in Lake Michigan, for example. And so these guys are out there in these horrifically cold conditions catching waves. And, there's pictures, like there are cases where the waves look pretty darn fun.
Yeah.
And they are, I have a mad respect for them, because they are out there battling these elements. And it's, I've surfed up in like Canada and Oregon and Washington and, in the Northeast in the winter, all of which is pretty cold, but this is a whole nother level. But, they are as passionate about that and that coastline as any of us, and, working to really protect them. And they've got some still, old school point source pollution problems. So the story I wanted to tell you is, U.S. Steel has a plant in Indiana, actually, that is dumping hexavalent chromium.
Not a good one.
Lake in Michigan. No, it's the Aaron Brockovich poison. I tell people, it's that, and they are, it's a process in producing steel. I guess it's one of the chemicals they use, and they're dumping it and reporting it to the EPA, and this has been going on for years and years and years. And it was actually Chicago Law School and our Surfrider chapter in Chicago that discovered that this was happening, and the place they're dumping is SurfSpot. So, we've joined forces with the University of Chicago Law School, and we've sued U.S. Steel to upgrade their point source permit to get this chemical out of there. So that's been an ongoing issue now for years about, we're in discussions with them, and the city of Chicago is involved to try to create a more strict permit to reduce the amount of these horrible toxins they're dumping into Lake Michigan. So it's Lake Michigan surfers.
Shout out to those guys. Yeah.
Totally.
It's always crazy to me hearing these stories, man, about a toxic substance like that in this 21st century is still just getting dumped out into a waterway. It's like, yeah, when is this going to come to a close? That's crazy, but awesome for those guys fighting that fight there. Last thing I wanted to ask you about is kind of federal policy, federal budget. It's a crazy year, right? With coronavirus, with really the civil unrest going on in the country right now, with an election coming up. So in many ways, it's a very tough, unusual year to be going to the federal government and asking for certain policies and certain budgets. But what are you guys hoping for? What are kind of your top priorities when it comes to the federal side of things?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is. I think it's a lot of that work has been overshadowed by all, understandably, by all of the recent events. And we're still plugging away. We did have a huge Clean Water Act victory that went all the way to the Supreme Court about 6 weeks ago on a case about injecting wastewater into the ground in Maui, which really hinged on the question of does groundwater, the connectivity between the pollution source and the water body, matter? And given the makeup of the court, we were pretty concerned about the outcome of that, but we won 6-3. And they're trying to put some definitions. They call that the functional equivalent. So, if the waste or whatever the pollution that's entering the ground, if it's flowing through the groundwater and that's the functional equivalent of a river and coming out into the water body, it needs a Clean Water Act permit, an NPDES permit. So that was a huge victory for us and for clean water. And this was the Supreme Court making this decision in the middle of the COVID crisis. So that was some really good news. We've been working hard on we've been playing a lot of defense because this administration has not been friendly to environmental protections. So we've been really trying to make sure that the clean water rule, which has been threatened, that's something we're trying to protect. So these intermittent streams and areas are protected. I mean, it's been a debate that's been going on for decades.
So that's when I was at EPA, I was in the Office of Water it's Water's the U.S., right? But that name Clean Water Rule is what we went with because we felt that's what it was delivering and was more understandable to people. So I've lived that one and I understand, and that is so critical. We're talking about a third of streams that provide drinking water were a third of Americans, and millions of acres of wetlands. It's like elementary schoolers understand that water flows downhill, right? Like you got to protect the source to protect what's down.
100%. And trying to make sure NOAA, the National Ocean and Atmospheric Administration, and the EPA are properly funded. And defending the Clean Water Act. So, we call it the Stand Up for Clean Water campaign. And those are the pillars under it that we've been fighting for. So, the Trump administration typically is trying to slash the budgets of these agencies. We work with Congress to try to get that money back into the budgets. It's actually been more bipartisan than you would expect, which is somewhat encouraging. Sending money back to your district in terms of funding these agencies in your home states is a good thing, and both sides need to recognize that. So that's been a focus. We have also a new bill, the Break Free from Plastic Pollution Act, which is a big federal comprehensive sort of plastic pollution act that focuses on single-use plastics. It focuses on trying to get these redemption. Their states have these recycling redemptions. If you bring this bottle back, you get 10 cents, and that's really spotty. In the states that have it, we see a huge reduction in waste and increase in recycling, orders of magnitude. So we want to nationalize those programs. And then one of the things that's really interesting is as the world gets off of gasoline for cars, you've seen the price of oil, and we're electrifying cars or driving them less. No one's been driving a car, I don't think, for the last 2 months, hardly. So the oil and gas industry is trying to figure out what the next use of oil is for them, and it's plastics. So there's a huge move to build these cracker plants, they call them, sort of, in the Midwest and in Texas. And it's poorly regulated, and they're just taking that cheap natural gas and turning it into plastic. So we really want to see a pause on that until we can figure out what we're doing. It needs to be regulated in terms of the production processes itself, and do we really want to make plastic even even cheaper and more accessible than it already is.
Wow, I was not aware of that that happening. I'm going to have to read up on that a little bit. That's not good, not good. It also makes sense what you said about you're on the defensive right now, right? With the Trump administration, you're not looking to make gains here and there necessarily, but at least hold the line on a lot of this stuff.
Yeah.
Well, Chad, it was awesome to catch up with you again. I appreciate it. And like I said before, hopefully I'll see you in the water at some point somewhere,
Yeah, I look forward to us being able to travel again, and if I'm in your neck of the woods, I will definitely look you up, and you're always welcome to come out here and catch a wave.
Awesome, man. Thanks a lot. Take care.
All right. Yeah. Thank you.
Waterloop, waterloop, waterloop.
The Waterloop podcast is sponsored by High Sierra Showerheads, the smart, stylish choice for conserving water, energy, and money while enjoying an invigorating shower. Use promo code WATERLOOP for 20% off at highsierrashowerheads.com.
You're in the water loop.
Waterloop, waterloop, waterloop.